We heard you loud and clear that you want more input in terms of the CIP projects. And so today we're going to say, do you agree with the way the supplementals are structured, and have we missed anything? Once we have that discussion, we can go back and calculate what it's going to cost to get those projects underway. And then we're going to end the meeting as well on just an overview of Portola with several of the council members, and quite frankly, the staff. We have had different understandings of where that project is, the Portola interchange. So Andy Firestein and I have been spending quite a bit of time with CBAG and our friends over there, just understanding the financing, the history of the project. And I've asked Andy to lead a discussion today to make sure that we're all operating on the same page of facts by the time we leave the meeting today. So it's really important meeting, trying to make sure that council feels as included as possible. And quite frankly, if there's some things that you'd like us to work on that we're not hitting today, we'd like to know that sooner rather than later. So at that point, I hope you find the presentation a little bit easier to understand and digest and make good decisions on. And we're always willing to take your feedback and improve things. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Janet and Andy to take us through the presentation.
All right, great, thank you, everybody. And this is the first step in the process for the budget. I believe our next meeting is May 11th, and we'll get into a little bit more of the detail of the categories of expenditures in the general fund and some of our primary funds that we see all the time. Today, our objectives, I'm not going to read them to you, obviously, but we're going to be going through kind of the newly formatted things. We're going to be looking at, as Todd said, year one projects, supplementals, etc. I'm going to jump right in where I know we may have some time crunches today and we want to try to get through this. So what we did here is we kind of blocked into the categories on the CIP and identified the revenue sources that would be paying for the categories of these. If you see, yes, general fund is located in a couple of these areas of projects or these couple of these categories, but when I get to my next slide, I'll show you that the general fund really doesn't have that much that's funding this. We do try to maximize the funding sources of restricted monies for the projects that we are doing so that we can utilize those funds first. As many of you know, the developer impact fees that we use, they need to be expended within a 5-year term, or they need to be, projects need to be identified. So that's what we try to do first. So I'm going to go through these. I know you got a copy of this slide deck, so if you have questions, please stop me. Now I'm going to caveat that with if you could verbally say something, because since I'm sharing my screen, I only have a very small window of who might have a question. So when I turn it over to Andy, I know he's going to want the same thing, so I'll try to monitor those things. We'll all try to help each other if someone has a question. Here is a 5-year capital improvement program summary. This is kind of what what Todd was mentioning with respect to making it easier to understand. What we've done is we've grouped these projects and we've identified the funding sources. If you can see across the 5 years, they are all funded. I go down to the bottom of the slide just again to point out the general fund line. You can see that it is not as big as other projects or other funding sources. And again, that's because we try to maximize the other funding that we have available to us. Let's see. I'm going to go into the next slide and I'm going to turn it over to Andy and let him explain kind of the new formatting of the CIP.
Thank you, Janet. So as you saw on that last slide, we've started to look at the CIP a little bit differently this year. And you have several discrete categories now, whereas before you had 3 categories, one for new projects, annual projects, and continuing programs. That setup worked for years, but really what we're looking to do is to create a more intentional path from some of the plans and the studies that we're doing. And we'll start to talk about those here in a moment to the CIP document itself. So you can see just directly the connection between the investments you're making in the CIP and very specific targets, very specific outcomes. So today, you'll see a CIP that is structured around streets, and then more specifically, those subcategories that you see, facilities, parks and landscaping, desert willow, and then the other 2 categories. And what this does is it allows you to see projects against other similar projects. And then as we start to get into those plans and studies, we're starting to build the pipeline between the long-range plans or the documents that we're preparing and the CIP document. So we can create more objective-based criteria for how projects get programmed into the CIP. And with that, Randy Bowman is going to start talking to you about some of those plans and studies, some of which you considered last night at your council meeting, and just how those are going to start informing the decisions we make in the CIP. And then from there, he's going to start sharing with you some of the projects that we've undertaken that are underway right now, and what we have intended for the upcoming fiscal year. Let's go ahead and change the slide, Janet. And with that, Randy Bowman will take it from here.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, City Council has authorized us to proceed on the traffic operations and capacity improvements as of last night. And that's going to inform our 5-year CIP and probably beyond 5 years on where we need to focus attention to making intersection capacity and operational improvements. The local roadway safety plan, that study is wrapping up. We are holding our last public stakeholder meeting next week, and then we will package it up and submit that to City Council. The intention of the roadway safety plan is to, again, inform Council on recommended priorities for safety related improvements. And a first fruit born from the LRSP effort was Caltrans awarding $2.2 million last month to the city to conduct the first identified series of safety improvements. The bridge maintenance program that you awarded last night, again, a multi-year look ahead to where we need to be making investment in our bridge infrastructure to maintain them at appropriate service levels. And then ultimately everything needs to be replaced at some point. And so a long-range glimpse of our long-range bridge replacement and major rehabilitation needs is going to come from this program, and it will inform the City Council on recommended priorities. And lastly, the bicycle and ped infrastructure. You have approved a series of contracts in recent weeks to conduct a study to identify the gaps in bikeway and pedestrian infrastructure throughout the city. The ongoing CVLink Connectors project that is wrapping up stakeholder involvement and is going to be submitted to City Council for review and direction. Those, again, will have a long view look at the city's needs and recommended priorities for investing in bikeway and pedestrian improvements to create a system that is truly linked up within the city. Janet, could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So Andy and Todd referenced that there are projects that are underway. There are some projects that are funded in this year's current capital budget that we are working on to get kicked in gear. These are more minor improvements compared to some of the big ones that are listed down at the bottom of the page. But every year the city conducts a catch basin cleaning and storm drain program, and we'll be kicking out a project on that this summer. The Whitestone drainage improvements, we have an established need to improve drainage along Whitestone Lane. We have some roadway flooding that can probably be resolved by some paving improvements. So this is more of a paving project than a storm drain improvement project, but it's an effort that that the city manager has approved award of an administrative contract to begin the design, and then the construction will proceed later this year. Monterey Slope Protection is a sidewalk that has soil eroding from below it due to wind erosion up near the 10, and it's a minor project that we need to have a consultant hired and then design something for us and then put it out to bids. And then lastly, a curb ramp modification program. Every year, the city makes investments in upgrading and modernizing the accessibility to sidewalks at various roadway locations throughout the city. The major projects, not surprising, San Pablo. The phase 2 project is wrapping up at the end of June. It'll be substantially completed just in time for the city's 4th of July activities. The triple left turn at Washington, it was a collaborative effort between La Quinta, Indian Wells, and the city of Palm Desert. That project is largely completed. They're waiting on a few items to be installed, but it's mostly complete. And then the President's Plaza, long-awaited project. We have kept council up to date on progress since council awarded the construction contract. And on May 13th, we expect to bring to council, if we need supplemental dollars for SCE related utility coordination and relocations, we'll bring that to council. But we are looking to kick the construction off before the end of May, and we have a pre-construction meeting that we've tentatively set for May 12th. Next slide, please. Thank you, Janet. So we also, as many cities do, we have great ideas and new initiatives that arise during the course of a fiscal year. And the 4 projects on this list are projects that we are presently engaged in. Alessandro Phase 2, the design is over 2/3 complete. We are wrapping up comments from utilities and our contractual city engineer, and then we will be looking to bid this project out. Monterey and Fred Waring, that is a need that was brought to our attention by the city council. We have conducted a feasibility study for adding a northbound right turn lane at the intersection. And that study was conducted in light of other improvements that are either underway or pending in the area, such as the CVLink project or the forthcoming CVSync project, an initiative by CVAG. The traffic operations capacity analysis, again, that's something I've already mentioned. That's going to give us that long view for where should we focus our attentions and dollars for improving intersection capacity and operations. And then lastly, Haystack from 74 to Portola, the tragic accident that occurred several weeks ago. The city has developed a strategy to conduct a study of the roadway, looking at ways to calm speeds, calm traffic, improve bikeway and pedestrian safety and safety overall for the roadway. And that's expected to be a very engaging effort with the community. And we are looking at a kickoff meeting with the community on May 4th. Janet, next slide, please. And we are also looking at the CIP. We are suggesting that a couple of standing projects in the CIP be looked at in light of these larger study efforts and make sure that we are appropriately prioritizing and, quite frankly, conceiving of them, their scopes. And those include the Town Center Hahn intersection. It was placed into the capital budget last year. And also a similar little improvement at Country Club in Washington. Those both are going to be looked at through the intersection capacity and traffic operations study. And then similarly, the Monterey Avenue pedestrian crossing improvement. It was a project that was proposed into the CIP last year. And that fits into the local roadway safety plan effort because it's more of a safety type of an improvement. Projects that can be accomplished without creating an annual program. We had created for this year a line item for ADA on-street parking improvements. That really was an anticipatory kind of a project where if we received requests or complaints for ADA compliant on-street parking, we would have funds to invest in design and construction. Nothing really has materialized. And so we believe that since these are more one-off types of initiatives or improvements, that we can tackle those as they occur. And then lastly, with discussion for last year's capital budget, council suggested that staff look at repurposing the Cook Street widening project. It was a sizable allocation of Measure A funds, and 2 improvements have been already constructed under the auspices of a Cook Street project. Both of those projects occurred many years ago. and also a Deep Canyon storm drain extension project that really is really not needed. It's not a priority. So both of these projects are being proposed to be removed from the capital improvement plan. Janet, next slide, please.
Randy, before
yes,
next slide, quick question. Could you elaborate on the Deep Canyon storm drain extension south of 111? Because at some point in time, somebody thought it was needed. Palm Desert has really excelled with our storm drain work. So I'd like to hear a bit more to be fully convinced it's not needed.
Sure thing. The project has existed for some time in the city's capital improvement plan, and as a part of looking at the capital improvement budget and capital improvement projects list, we have numerous projects that we might be thinking of as staff. The storm drain extension was meant to solve a problem really that does not exist. I think it was an anticipatory project that was placed into the capital improvement plan. But as the engineers looked at this, we're not seeing that this project is truly needed.
I'll probably ask to learn more offline.
We can follow up with you on that, Mayor.
And I would also like to know more. That was going to be my question. So please include me in that.
Very good.
I had a question too.
Go for it.
May I? Okay, and I don't know if this is the time, but there's one other intersection of concern that I haven't seen, and it's over by Monterey and the 10 freeway where we're building the Monterey Crossings project, or I should say the developer is. I see that as being a traffic concern as well. It's already bad right now with cars backed up getting on the 10 freeway. You know, some are on that very right lane thinking that's the lane to go west when they find out you can only turn right to go east. And it's already an issue, and I'm concerned it's going to get a lot worse once that center is up and operating.
Council member, are you referring to like the section of Monterey, say from Dinah Shore up north to the 10?
Yes.
Okay.
That corner,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. You will be seeing with the local road safety plan briefing that we'll be providing you within the next couple of months. That was one of the locations that really shines out in terms of a need for safety related improvements. The consultant actually did a case study of that segment of the roadway as well as the intersection to look at how can the safety be improved. Yet we are seeing a lot of accidents in that intersection, in addition to any capacity related concerns. Now, what we need to understand is that while the intersection of Dinah Shore and Monterey is within the city of Palm Desert, although the southwest corner is also city of Rancho Mirage, so there's coordination there. North of that intersection, we are getting into Caltrans territory. So we have some recommendations from the consultant that after we review the LRSP with the city council, our next step is to talk with Caltrans about some of those observations and recommendations that the consultant has made. So you shine the light on an intersection that ranks as one of the most problematic intersections in the city right now for safety. And then of course we have the capacity improvements. So yes, that is a project that has been identified that needs to have some attention to it. And I think that will come through the LRSP.
Thank you very much.
Okay, lastly, and I'll be transitioning over to Andy after this slide. Looking ahead to next fiscal year, so the fruits that are being born in this current fiscal year, including the mid-year additions, influence how we're presenting the 21-22 streets portion of the capital improvement plan. So right off the bat, City Council last night authorized $500,000 for the first phase of the traffic operations and capacity improvement study. And that is going to, by the end of this year, provide recommendations to City Council to consider for where should we make our first, second, third investments at intersections to improve operations and capacity improvements. The funding that we're proposing for 21-22 picks up after phase one and begins the design of those improvements, as well as if there are any low-hanging fruit, immediate implementation opportunities that funding we're proposing next year could start that implementation. Haystack 74 intersection improvement, we are entering into the contract with the designer for this pedestrian safety related improvement. We expect the design will be completed within the next several months, and then construction will be commenced in the next fiscal year, commenced and completed. The third bullet, the traffic signal upgrade and replacement. Every year the city bids out work to replace various pieces and parts of its traffic signal equipment that fail, whether it's the lighted street name signs or overhead luminaire safety lighting at intersections or vehicular indication heads, the red, green, yellow heads. This is our annual replacement program for that equipment. Roadways and bridges, City Council approved the bridge project last night that will result in that long view look to create a practical approach to maintaining the city's bridges. And in addition to that, we will have the HCIP projects that are those first two grant applications that we received from Caltrans that stem from the LRSP project. The good news about HCIP, which is Highway Safety Improvement Program funding, is we went after 100% grant from Caltrans. Caltrans said yes, but we have to front the funds because it's a reimbursement type of a grant program. So we have funding proposed so the city can front the funds for the design and construction and then get repaid back 100% by Caltrans. Alessandro Phase 2 we've already mentioned, and El Paseo is prospectively the implementation of further mid-block crossings, for instance, or changes to the crosswalks that were painted and implemented with the demonstration project. Geez, last year. It seems like it's 2 years ago already. And moving ahead, CVLink connectors, we've already talked
Randy,
about that.
Just before you move ahead,
Yes, sir.
I have a question regarding El Paseo. Is this the appropriate time to address that?
Please.
Okay, so, you know, it feels like maybe it's been a couple of years now. I'm not sure exactly, but we were full steam ahead on El Paseo. We hired a consultant. We invested treasure and blood and time, staff time, community time, went through design, community meetings, and so on and so forth, and really generated some excitement and anticipation, and then crickets. Why did that stop? Where are we with it? And when are we going to resume the redesign and the reimagination of El Paseo?
We are going to plan on giving the council an update on a number of items related to El Paseo on May 27th, and some of the design features, other smaller projects that were put on hold, and will also be discussed at that meeting, as well as the dining decks, that sort of thing. So it's going to be a fairly large discussion, including 4 or 5 different topics. And I think at that point we can get back up to speed. And if the council wants us to keep moving on the smaller projects, we'll do that. If there's anything else in terms of I think the study that you're probably referring to, we can certainly take your input at that time as well.
You mentioned May 27th. I don't
Yes.
have anything on my calendar other than the council meeting. Is there a study session planned for then?
Yeah, we're going to plan on putting a study session on there and just focusing on several items regarding El Paseo. We've had a number of questions regarding the dining decks, the TUPs, the raised crosswalks, the sidewalks, and the study that was performed this last year. So We're going to go ahead and brief you on where we are at this point, some upgrades that need to be made, and I've asked staff to reach out to the business owners and merchants as well ahead of the meeting, let them know that we're having that discussion, and try to make sure that you have any of their input as well.
Okay, so we'll address both short-term issues relating to El Paseo as well as the bigger picture relating to El Paseo. Is that correct?
Yes, and if there's specific items that you would like us to address at that meeting, please let us know, and we're happy to put that on as a bullet point and tackle it at that time.
Okay, well, I can tell you right now, since it's top of mind, that one issue that's been brought to me, and I have questions about as well, is will outdoor dining decks be permanent? And if so, what will they look like? Number two, how does that integrate with El Paseo specifically in terms of the redesign? Will we have dining decks on the sidewalks, for example, versus taking up a parking lane? And then, of course, the timing of when we can expect to move forward with that. So those are some of the questions that I would hope we have discussion on.
And those are definitely two of the subjects we're preparing for.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
The bike and pedestrian, I think we've already really discussed these efforts. CVLink Connectors is moving into the next phase after the alternatives analysis, which we're bringing to City Council within the next 2 months. Once we receive direction confirmation from City Council on the priorities and the nature of the recommended connections, the bike and ped connections through the downtown core to the CV-Link, then the consultant will move into preliminary engineering and final engineering. And again, there's probably some low-hanging fruit opportunities to do some early implementations of the CV-Link Connectors project with City Council buy-in. Bike lane.
Sorry, Randy, do CV-Link Connectors include what we had discussed previously, which is going across the channel, the flood channel from the bump and grind and connecting to El Paseo?
Yes, sir, it does. Yes, that's one of the alternative alignments that the consultant has been studying.
That's the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Bike lane striping contract. That's a contract council approved last night. It's the keep a consultant in your hip pocket to quickly pop out some bike lane designs when we resurface or slurry a road. And then the bikeway and ped improvements I've already talked about. Lastly, citywide programs and projects. The street resurfacing program, which is our mill and fill projects, much like what we did with Monterey Avenue last year, as well as our slurry seal program, which is wrapping up right now. Both annual programs. We also need to conduct our pavement condition evaluation. That's where we have professionals drive every street in the city and using technology provide insights on the condition of our roadways, which we call the Pavement Condition Index or Pavement Condition Rating, PCR, PCI. And that will influence where we invest our dollars to keep our roadways in good shape. Staff has also identified a substantial resurfacing pavement rehabilitation effort for Cook Street at the north end, and that project would be similar to how we handled the Monterey Avenue pavement rehabilitation project last year. And then lastly, there's always a need to refresh our striping on our roadways every year. Next slide, please, Janet. Janet, are you there?
I am. For some reason, I am having, there we go.
The slideshow needs coffee.
It must.
So I'm going to hand this over to Andy, but I did want to just talk about the Civic Center Voltaic project. We've been requested to look at the condition of the existing photovoltaic system that's at the Civic Center campus, and we have found a firm that will conduct a feasibility study, take a look at the existing system, what didn't work, why it didn't work, what investments could we make to re-energize, and forgive the pun, the city's investment in solar power. We had a very productive conversation with this nonprofit. It's a statewide entity that is geared up to conduct just what the city wants, to look at the feasibility, look at rate of return on investment, and provide some insights so the city can make some decisions for what it may want to do. We expect the study effort to proceed this spring into the early summer, and we can provide the recommendations and the insights from the consultant to city council, so we can decide as a city what next to do when it comes to solar power. Then wrapping up.
Excuse me, Janet has a question, and
thank you, Mayor.
have a possible follow-up.
Okay, thank you very much. So I know the panels where we park right outside our door are not functioning. Are the panels over near Parkview, those are still good, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay, that was my easy question. Thank you.
And thank you for that. Is the requested study full and expansive? In other words, I'm hoping that it's about more than just the currently non-functioning panels, but a broader study of what the potential is at all of our city facilities and how to best tap that potential.
I think one thing we saw from I guess I'll call him a consultant, that we saw from the consultant is they take an approach of looking at the city's power consumption overall and look at ways that you could shave off those energy costs and do an ROI on those. And I think we would see from the consultant a more expansive look, not just focusing on the existing facilities, but what could be done. And that I think we'll see from the consultant analysis of, like, if the city wanted to own the infrastructure, what would the ROI be? If the city wanted to do a power purchase agreement situation, et cetera, or do a combination.
Is the answer
Randy.
yes?
So Randy, the scope was initially envisioned to be the Civic Center campus, but we could look at other city facilities too, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
May I ask a question, Mayor?
Yes, but could I just finish?
Absolutely.
One thought. The Sunlight program yesterday morning, in which each city was invited to brag a bit, caused me to realize that there are fronts upon which we were once leaders where we have fallen behind. And this is one of them. We were one of the first to get something up on the roof, but while ours is not currently functioning, our neighboring cities are bragging about what's operational for them. So I would suggest that we want to make sure we talk to our neighbors and find out what their analysis convinced them of in terms of which choices were the smartest. Cathedral City was one of the cities featuring its current solar program for city uses. So with that, so be sure to talk to our neighbors. Karina.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask if the nonprofit that will be involved in the feasibility study, since there is the broad opportunity to look at other things, would it be possible for them to also take into consideration, or maybe even a peek at a dark skies initiative, if that would be an opportunity to shave off extra energy that's being used that doesn't need to be pointing upward, and other ways that we can make ways in different directions. Just again, if it's an opportunity to have the same study give us a double bang for our buck.
I think we'll try to squeak out everything that we can from that effort, and these are good points of input. Thank you. Wrapping up my last two items, we're also proposing in the CIP next year to make an investment in conceptual designs for the North Sphere Park. There is a housing project that is proposed in the exact vicinity of the North Sphere Park area, and I think there's a need to make sure that the parking design for the park and the facilities are being coordinated and serving the community well, particularly in light of the development that's being proposed in the area. And then lastly, outdoor fitness facilities. Andy, I think these are outdoor fitness equipment to be installed in various locations. I don't have those specific locations at this moment, but that is an initiative to get people working out outside.
Thank you, Randy. And I do want to speak momentarily about the Desert Willow Golf Resort. So this will be
Andy,
part of.
Andy, I'm sorry, just before we leave that part of the presentation, on parks and landscaping, Randy, you know, I sit on the Parks and Rec Committee, and I want to make sure that this stuff doesn't come as a surprise to that committee, because they've been very involved in the past and anxiously awaiting their role in designing that park. We've also had discussions about outdoor fitness facilities. So if you don't mind, let's at least involve them in that process.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, council member.
Thank you. Sorry, Andy.
Jan has her hand up.
Thank you. Just a couple things, and these are just small little notes, and I appreciate what Councilmember Jonathan said. I'd love to see us, it's such a great park, is the La Palma Park, or not La Palma, I'm sorry, Palma Village. It would be such a great little park to do, you know, to use as our model going forward for the fitness facilities. So it's just a thought. It would be, I'm sure, welcome in that neighborhood, and it's a very manageable project. The other thing is, and I say this a lot, and I know it seems inconsequential, but we got to think of a new name other than North Sphere. It just is not Palm Desert appropriate. So we got to come up with something that's, whether it's University Park or something that's wonderful and speaks of Palm Desert. Thank you.
And on the topic of the Palma Village Park, I wonder if Chris Gary could join us briefly to share about some of the work that's underway to get neighborhood input about the updating of that park.
I am looking to see if he is.
He's coming.
Okay.
I see his name. He's just still muted. Here he is.
Hi, good morning, everyone. You know, it's transitioning, so I from when I was being elevated, so I lost part of that conversation, but it sounded like you were the comment was in regards to the community outreach that's being done in regard to Palma Village Park. So great. As we know, I think it was last year, the city allocated $142,000 to improvements in Palma Village Park and some other improvements as well, some sidewalk improvements, which there's some flexibility with that money if there was council interest in allocating additional funds towards Palma Village Park. But the first thing we did with that project is we've conducted a community survey to about 200 residents who are adjacent to the park. We've also used our different social media outlets to do some outreach. And at this point, we have about 32 responses to a community survey of what exactly they want in that park and how do they feel safe in that park. And so we're at this moment, we're still putting the results together and seeing what types of information can come out of that survey. But we've also collected information from the community as far as their email addresses and contact information who want to participate in future outreach. I think it was Councilmember Harnick was mentioning, I think it was exercise equipment or just kind of ways to activate the park. And I think looking at the survey results, that was one of the items that did have interest. as well as kind of cultural or kind of artistic elements to Palma Village Park. So there'll be more information to follow on that. And we're also looking at additional ways to conduct outreach.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let me address the last item on the slide, and that is the Desert Willow Golf Resort. So we don't have much to share with you today about the Desert Willow Golf Resort. You will see this as part of the 5-year CIP in your subsequent budget discussions. But what I do want to draw your attention to is the Firecliff course and some anticipated course renovations. Going all the way back to the 2014 master plan, we have anticipated a need to do a greens replacement and a tee box renovation project. And that is something that we are looking at starting in this upcoming fiscal year. It does take a lot of time to do this, and the actual construction is not anticipated until 2023. But this year, we do want to look at getting an architect or a consultant on board to start building that bid package so that we can go out and find a contractor to do that work. From what we hear from Derek White and the Desert Willow team, those contractors are in high demand, and that we need to plan well in advance to get that bid package out on the street over a year ahead of the actual construction time, so that we are lined up to do this within the summer of 2023, so that we're shutting the course down for as minimal of a time as we can, and so that we're minimally affecting the operations and play of the Desert Willow Golf Resort. But we are anticipating that is programmed this year, together with the other activities you would expect from Derek White and his team. They are planning, they are anticipating on the maintenance that is required to keep the course at a high level of play, and as well the user experience. But I do want to draw your attention to the Firecliff green replacement and tee box renovation work and what we need to do in the upcoming year in order to plan and anticipate that project. Janet, let's go ahead and change the slide. All right, so this is a supplemental project list, and you had a handout for this as well. This really distills what is in that handout into a single screenshot. The handout has descriptions for each of these projects and a little bit more information on them, but this shows you the categorization or the prioritization of all of these projects. Everything on here you've likely seen before at some point. These were all postponed or deferred or deprioritized for some reason. Most of these because they were general fund projects, and last year as we got into the pandemic after that declaration of local emergency on March 17th, there was a determination that we should pause many of these general fund projects until we had a little bit more certainty about our revenues and our future. So these projects were postponed at that time. There are others that were postponed for other reasons. It may have been staff bandwidth or something else, but we're sharing them with you today, as Todd has said, to see if any of these projects rise up that council wishes to undertake. Anything on this list can be done. I would say that if it is general fund, it's not noted. If it's some other funding source, that's shown in parentheticals. So there are some Measure A projects on here. There are some that are Gulf Capital, for instance. Those are shown on here. We've also given you as much of a indication of what these projects cost. Some of these cost estimates are very current. I would say that the council chambers remodel, that's something that we've refined, that we've worked on, that we do believe that is about a $2.2 million project. Some of these others, the cost estimates may be a little bit older, but we can get additional information. We can update those cost estimates. Overall, this is intended really to create a framework for discussion with council today to say, do any of these rise up and draw your attention to say, we want to undertake this project in addition to what Randy has just shared and presented with you as projects that we're undertaking in the fiscal year 21-22 year. Staff has looked at these and has attempted to give you some categorization, some prioritization of these projects, 1 being the highest priority, 4 being the lowest priority. It's not to say that these are not viable projects, that these are not good projects if they're a 3 or a 4, but just that there are some that may be more immediate, that we may see a clearer need. Just referencing the council chambers, for instance, that's a project that was about 95% designed. There still is a lot of work that needs to go into that if we were to undertake that project. It's probably about 4 to 6 months, I would say, before we're at a point to start construction on that project, but that's a very realizable project. Councilmember Jonathan, you asked about El Paseo. Yes, El Paseo is on this list too. We are anticipating on bringing this to council on May 27th, but we know that there's more work to be done, whether that's the mid-block crossings, for instance, adding more mid-block crossings, or even looking at the removal of the colored crosswalks. That is on the list as well. So with this slide, rather than have me go through and speak to each of these projects individually, I think this is a good opportunity for council to talk about what you see as a priority and to help staff perhaps focus on some of these projects. We are here to answer any questions that you may have on any one of these. And I think this is an opportunity for direction to be given to staff if any of these are to be added into the CIP that we have presented to you.
We have a couple of hands up. Gina and then Sappy.
Okay. Basically, what I see, I do like the how you prioritize the projects. I do believe the main lobby remodel. I'd like it to stay on the back burner compared to the other projects, in my humble opinion. But in terms of the undergrounding, when it says various sources, is there somebody else's money that can be used? Is that what you mean by various sources? Because it would be, I believe it would help the aesthetics of our city to do whatever undergrounding is possible that's cost effective.
Sure. So let me address undergrounding, and I may lean on Janet a little bit on the funding sources, but undergrounding projects are categorized as Rule A, Rule 20A, Rule 20B, and Rule 20C. Rule 20B, those are the residential projects. And the way that we currently have it structured, for residential projects to be undergrounded, we need to work with property owners, with residents to form an assessment district. And there's a good example of that right now in Marrakesh with the undergrounding of some lines on Tamarisk. So that's a good example of how neighbors can come together and underground. That's not a project where there's a direct infusion of city monies into that project. Now, Rule 20A projects are a little bit different. Rule 20A and Rule 20C, those are undergrounding projects on major arterials. That's a case where, at least right now, the city would be responsible for undergrounding those projects. There are some monies, there are some credits available through SoCal Edison. I think we have about $900,000, roughly, maybe close to $1 million by now in our undergrounding credit account. There may be some opportunities to seek additional monies to purchase credits on the open market to underground those lines. I would say, though, that the undergrounding of the Rule 20A lines, where we have the eligibility to use those credits, the costs are in the hundreds of millions of dollars to underground those projects. So while we may have a little bit of money, it's a very high cost and something where we would need a lot more money to do that. Janet, would you like to answer the question on the funding sources?
Yeah, and I just want to interject real quick. I remember the study session we had on this, I think 2 years ago, so it doesn't seem like much has changed.
Not much has changed. We did look at bringing in a consultant, and this consultant would have assisted with some of the outreach to our neighborhoods, trying to identify areas where there might be more support for the creation of an assessment district, where if there was a group of interested residents, that perhaps we could prioritize that area, that neighborhood, work with them, because there's a greater likelihood that as we go through that process to petition the residents for the creation of an assessment district, that there may be more support for it, where our time, our investment that we put into the project, it may not be, say, paying for the undergrounding, but where that time spent working with the neighborhoods may produce an outcome that results in the undergrounding of those lines. That was one intent. The consultant was also projected to work with us on the Rule 20A projects and even the Rule 20C to look at the prioritization of those lines. Are there segments, are there sections that may be higher target? We do have the implementation plan, but really trying to help us refine a picture of what a project could look like for the city. If we look at this in totality, if we just look at the undergrounding master plan, we look at the hundreds of millions of dollars of costs that are embedded in that plan, it's a very large undertaking, but with some additional focus, we may be able to identify some targets that we could undertake that may be more realizable.
Thank you.
And I think just adding from my perspective, the reason we put various is because we do have some money set aside that we have been setting aside for several years from the restricted capital improvement fund, which was from the former agency bond funds for that. But it is not a lot, and it is not in any way, as Andy said, talking about Rule 20A or 20C. It's to help in some of the costs that can be paid for 20B if a neighborhood wanted to come forward, much like I don't remember if they had a name that they came through, but I believe Marilee Colton kind of led that group and had that neighborhood that came in. But that is why it says various, because there are a few sources, but they're very small. The Rule 20B also, or the credits that we have, the few credits, almost $1 million, is still nothing close to the hundreds of millions that the implementation plan and the study indicated. Now, I'm not sure. I mean, I think Ryan Gaylor, was the one who kind of presented that to the council, but we can certainly pull that implementation plan and get it to you if you'd like to take another look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Sappy, Jan, and Karina.
Thank you. So I'll pick up where Gina started and talk very candidly about undergrounding. I think we need to be realistic when the city has successes, and we have to be equally realistic when the city has failures. In my opinion, this has been a dismal failure by the city, not because it's an easy job that should have been done, but because of the lack of focus and cohesiveness in addressing the issue. My deep dive into this started, I don't know, at the beginning of my council term, so it's like 7 years ago. And for those of us on this call that weren't there, we formed a citizens committee. We had numerous meetings. We hired a consultant. We really did great work. And the goal was to develop a long-term plan for undergrounding the entire city. And we came out with that plan. And one of the first steps was to address 20B type projects, the neighborhood projects. And we approved, I think it was a $250,000 consulting contract that frankly never went anywhere. The idea was that it would result in outreach to neighborhoods and a system that would make it easy for them to take advantage of what has been done a few times throughout the city. I think Marrakesh was categorized as a good example of that. I would take exception. I would say it's an example of the worst way in which this 20B project can be implemented. If you talk to Marilee Colton, she has devoted a significant part of her life individually as a citizen trying to get that project together. It's been years. And we as a city have made an effort to facilitate it and be helpful. And in spite of all that, it's still a project that hasn't gotten started physically in terms of construction and actual undergrounding. And this is in spite of the residents saying, yeah, we're ready to go. So it highlights the failures of the current system rather than illustrating a successful approach. We can do better, and I think we should do better, and I think we need to refocus on undergrounding. Yes, to underground the entire city, including the big lines under 20A and 20C, is a multi-$100-million project. So what? That doesn't mean that we can't do it in bites and move forward, particularly with what most of us recognize as the most unsightly part of overhead lines, which is those ones in the neighborhood. And I know at least one council member that has them in her backyard. So she knows what I'm talking about. And there are many homes like that predate the incorporation of our city. And we can and should do better. I'm seeing this as category 4. I'd like to get it moved up. I think you show some currently budgeted amounts, but just by this discussion, I think there's a lack of institutional memory and understanding and cohesiveness in addressing this issue, and I think we can do better. I do want to separately touch on the Invest Palm Desert, and I don't know if we should leave the undergrounding or if I'm willing to give up my position in the queue here if somebody wanted to address undergrounding. Otherwise, I'll move on to Invest Palm Desert. And seeing no hands waving, I'm just wondering, it's a question for staff, You know, we have seen the value in the past of facilitating business owners and property owners, improving their properties, particularly in areas where we want properties improved. Are we abandoning that? Is that temporary? Where is staff with Invest Palm Desert?
Good morning, Mayor and members of City Council. This is Martin. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning. I apologize. I've been having a little bit of technical difficulty, so if I drop, I will try to get back on. But the question as it relates to Invest Palm Desert, as you know, the City Council reprogrammed the $2 million that was originally set aside to move forward with this comprehensive and cohesive Invest Palm Desert program that would assist businesses expand, facades being remodeled, large blighted areas to be repurposed. So of course the shift was made as the pandemic hit, and we were able to help a significant amount of businesses with forgivable loans and grants and such. And so we put this back on the agenda to have a discussion with the council. Our position is that if the funding were available, we'd like to reinstate this program as we're coming out of the pandemic and really make an effort to shift our efforts into recovery. So that's where this is put forward for discussion. And I'd have to probably turn to Janet and see if there's any available funding in the Economic Development Reserve Fund, which I know it's probably been depleted to some point.
And what I would say, based on these supplemental projects, is staff really needs to get guidance from the council. We really need to know what things either are appropriately placed here in these categories, or what needs to be moved, or what is at the top of your list, so that what we can do is when we come back on May 11th, we can provide you with those options. And we do have some cost estimates here, but maybe we can provide you with some estimates on the ways that either these could be funded from existing monies, or what options might be available for revenue generators. So that's what we'd really like to do, but we really want your input in order to go forward. So what we would do is bring everything back together so that you could look at those things. But we really need guidance from the council on what things need to be moved, if any, to category 1.
Okay.
If I could add on to Janet's comments very briefly, I just want to reiterate, this is not a value expression. We're not placing a judgment on the merits of any of these projects on the list. What you see in category 1, these may be more realizable projects here in the short term, with projects that may be designed. We already have monies allocated for broadband. There's current work underway with broadband. We've already done very recent work with El Paseo. We have the Gibbs study, to Councilmember Jonathan's points about El Paseo. Neighborhood traffic calming. We see that this is something that could have very immediate, real impacts on neighborhoods. The project we're doing on Haystack is an example of what could come out of neighborhood traffic calming. There's other streets like that in the city where this could be applied. So I think as you're in category 1, even category 2, there's very realizable immediate projects. As you get into 3 and 4, they're similarly out of the general fund, but some of these may take a little bit more time to come to fruition, such as the underground. Yet it's not an expression of value or the merits of any of these projects. It's just a matter of what's in the queue that could be pushed out very quickly.
Okay, so just to finish up my turn here, in terms of input and Invest Palm Desert, I do see it as a priority for all the reasons that we discussed before. You know, we invested in economic recovery appropriately, $2.5 million, I think. And the idea was to defer and postpone, but not to abandon Invest Palm Desert. And I think we viewed that program as truly an investment that will reap returns. And I think especially as, God willing, we head past COVID, this is the time to re-implement that program. So speaking as one council member, you asked for input. I think it should be a priority. obviously based on affordability. Thank you.
Jan next, then Karina, and then I'll bat cleanup.
Well, thank you. I'm still trying to figure out how we chose the 1, 2, 3, 4 little icons there, but what I'm looking at, what I'm going to go to what I absolutely agree with is where you have in number 3, the removal of the El Paseo colored crosswalks is not a priority. We have much better things to do with our funds. And what we did find, I think probably every council person heard plenty about it. When we said we were going to take it out after the council meeting and it hit the news, we all heard from the people who liked it, who didn't feel the need to say how awful it was. That, you know, as we know, people who are unhappy, we tend to hear from more. I got a lot of calls and emails. What are you talking about? We love it. It's unique. It is something that is fun on El Paseo. Whether you agree with it or not, we know one thing. It's not the most hated thing that going into this process, we kind of had the impression it was. So it's not a place to spend money. That is definitely my belief on that. The other thing, when we talk about council chambers, which is in number 1, if it's ADA issues, I'm in. Those are things we have to deal with. If it's just to polish it up, I'm not sure, given the issues we're dealing with funding right now and the uncertainty, I don't think that would be, you know, if it's just putting new carpet down or those types of things, not a priority. ADA is. We want to make sure everybody has that opportunity to be in council chambers when that day comes and we can all be back there. The mid-block crossings, really important. We saw the asset they became on the one side, on the east side of El Paseo. It slowed people down, gave people a safe place to cross. I think those are relatively inexpensive with a great return. So I think that's a really important thing for El Paseo. Now I'm going to go back to what I really believe is most important, and that's the broadband. And for us to attract the right businesses, for people to be able to not have internet difficulty like we just heard Martine saying, for us to be conducting these meetings, which we're going to be doing a lot of. So between education, business, etc., broadband is essential. And when we're looking at this third tranche of money that's coming from federal government, and it talks about infrastructure, broadband is now included as infrastructure. So we need to watch for that and see if we can, you know, take the OPM approach with the broadband. That would be great. But I think it's critical for us to be successful going forward. We saw when CVAG released the map for CVSync, both 1 and 2 phases. Those are exactly the all the research they did, all the consultants that they hired. When we look at where that first ring is on the first phase of CVSync, it's exactly where broadband is. If there is any dark fiber in there, we need to jump in or ask to add, or perhaps even add other conduits. Anyway, there's opportunity there. And I really think it's an investment for today and tomorrow for our city and for our entire region. The other thing I think is important is if we look at the Discover Palm Desert, and for a couple reasons, and I don't know about the funding, but that again is one of those things that's an investment. We encourage people to be here, to spend their money here. And that was a great project doing that. Not only that, it would free up what the chamber is taking up over at Entrada del Paseo, and we can use that for better means. So I think the Discover Palm Desert is important. Of course, I would want to hear a lot more information before really pushing on that one, but I think we really need to look at broadband number one. And I could comment on all, but then I know Kathleen would give me the time. So those are my comments.
Go for it, Karina.
I first have a question for Ms. Moore. Jan, can you please tell me if there's any of these projects that have any funding that it would be at risk of being lost if we didn't use them, or any of them categorically tied?
No, these projects right here are minimally funded, if at all. Most of the cases, I think you've seen the asterisk ones, they may have a couple, maybe 100,000, couple 100,000, or the amount noted in either this year's CIP or next year's CIP. So at least at this moment, no, nothing is in jeopardy of losing.
Perfect. Thank you. I wanted to clarify that. So with that in mind, I think that these seem to be fairly well organized in terms of I can understand the feasibility or how close it would be to execution or fruition. I think that some of these do seem, if they are more vanity projects, again, if it's the remodel, I completely concur that should stay at number 4, and echo the sentiments of the other council members that ADA needs to be the first and foremost reason if there's any remodel that will be undertaken. And if that, even with the council chambers, if there's a way to break that up and make only the critical improvements and save some of that, I would rather see the Invest Palm Desert be prioritized. We require that to move forward. We've heard from people being patient. We know the sacrifices that everyone has done, and I think that's a good way for us to show the people of Palm Desert, thank you for the sacrifices that you've made. Here's how we can come together. And I wholeheartedly echo that the number 1 priority must be broadband. That is the way forward, and I wholeheartedly echo that. The solar project, I would also love to see move forward. We need to expand our green offerings, and I know I've had a couple of conversations regarding how we could do more for greenhouse, and that's a separate issue, separate topic. But I think that things like the crosswalk removal, that can be bumped down to number 4. And while we're at it, the discussion of undergrounding, I think that should remain at number 4.
Thank you. First, I'd like to feature for staff that I have not heard any disagreement within the council. We've each put the focus in a different place, but subsequent speakers have not offered any counterpoints. So I think you've got pretty unanimous guidance here about how to potentially massage these categories. I'm certainly hearing strong support for advancing on broadband. I see this as somewhat comparable to where we were with undergrounding 7 years ago, as Sabby described it. We aren't quite sure how to proceed strategically and to take advantage of the circumstances and funding sources that Jan pointed out. So the Economic Development Subcommittee has heard about the potential utility of getting some guidance about how to proceed strategically. That seems to be something we all strongly want to get behind. It sounds like we all want to take a reserved approach to council chamber modifications. I've heard people feature ADA. I would add to the priorities adjustments that would be wise in the face of this recent pandemic experience. We may or may not be done with this pandemic. It's unlikely to be the last challenge of this nature. So changes that make that space better suited to protect people in the face of those considerations, I would suggest also has to be a priority. But Discover Palm Desert does more for the city than any aesthetic changes to the council chambers, because it has such potential to help jumpstart what we want to see happen on San Pablo, creating an exciting space, as was brilliantly proposed by staff, that would attract people to the San Pablo corridor. Really could be a game changer. I've never seen this council as excited as it was when staff rolled out its vision for Discover Palm Desert. So don't let go of that big success. I've certainly heard several of us comment upon the importance of Invest Palm Desert to come out of this pandemic well. We do want to strategically boost not just existing businesses, but business recruitment. And that was a key part of Invest Palm Desert, was to strategically attract businesses that would be magnets for additional economic activity. The one thing I want to feature that no one has talked about is a security plan languishing here in category 3, because I just don't know how, in the face of current events in our world, we could let security modifications be a low priority. So unless I have a mistaken understanding of what's in that category, I think we owe it to ourselves, to staff, and to the public potentially to move that up. So maybe I'm misunderstanding what's embraced there. Andy, you're eager to straighten me out, I can see.
Not to straighten you out so much, but just to provide a little bit more context for that. And this really is to say that I think as this was envisioned when it was presented to council previously, this was campus-wide security plan that was looking at what technological improvements, what modifications we need to make to our facility. It is important. You're absolutely right about that. I think, though, that this is closely correlated to any additional remodels that we may do for any of our service areas. So this may be the development services building, this may be the main lobby, and it may be something that we want to think about as we approach some of those other projects that we do within our facility. It's not to say that we can't make incremental improvements, and we have done some incremental improvements. I can speak to some of the improvements that we've done here in the development services building to more clearly define public space and that private space, that back of office space. We can continue to look at those incremental improvements, but I think the opportunity for a security plan that is broad, that is very encompassing like this, should be connected to some other remodel project, because it's very likely that we'll want to redo our counter spaces or redo that public space. And rather than do the improvements twice, we should think about how they're connected together. So I think there's opportunity for us to look at immediate needs and to make those immediate needs without creating a program.
And my encouragement would be, let's bring forward documentation that shows we're doing the best possible job with current facilities to maximize safety, and not just waiting for the major remodel.
Undoubtedly. And I think we can work with our partners in law enforcement to do some of that threat assessment, to do some of that assessment without, say, spending $250,000 on a consultant. And we can look for those incremental improvements.
Thank you. Jan.
Thank you. A couple things. I didn't mention the undergrounding. I do want to hit on that for a moment, because to Savvy's point, we did talk about doing districting. So those people who are interested in putting in their own undergrounding, which is then put on their tax bill, would be able to do that. So it's not complete where the city comes into play as far as finances is creating districts for neighborhoods. Then they take on the cost. I think it is important. We talked a lot about it. I don't know what happened that we dropped the ball. This is not a DTC issue due to COVID. We dropped the ball before that. So I would like for us to take a look at those districts. They are important. There is a safety element. There is, again, right now we know for sure how important having utilities that we can depend on. We certainly did find that out during COVID. So it would be important to take a look at. I am certainly not saying let's go spend hundreds of millions of dollars and do undergrounding, but I am suggesting that we provide the opportunity for neighborhoods who would like to come together and do undergrounding. Let's give them that opportunity to do it. There are those who've worked hard to do it. The second thing, when convenient, a comfort break would be nice.
We're close to the end of this discussion, I think. Karina.
I would just like to add on to Mayor Pro Tem's comments about, adding or the benefit of having people come together for districts to work and achieve different goals. I think that perhaps undergrounding would be a good way to connect with those that want to work on special districts and bringing districting to the city so that different districts and groups of neighbors can work on these issues and involve everyone. So I just wanted to highlight that there's so many good projects that could be advanced by districts, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for pointing that out.
I would be disappointed if you didn't voice your perspective. I do want to feature that the districts that the earlier undergrounding plan envisioned would be much smaller than the 5 voting districts you have advanced, so as to accommodate defined areas in which it might be practical to undertake this kind of project. But we take your point. Sabby.
Yeah, and just to follow up, yeah, of course, districting is not an issue on the table. We're talking about neighborhoods creating boundaries. Maybe we should have a different name where homes within that boundary vote as to whether or not they want to be undergrounded, and they gain an understanding of what their costs would be and the funding options, including either paying in cash or putting it on their property tax roll, et cetera. So it's a process where the city can step in, and has failed to do without a great deal of cost, is facilitate that process. And that's what the consultant was hired to do, to create basically a handbook that's step by step, here's how you do it, and then to have a contact, a liaison within the city that helps them connect with Edison and other stakeholders to go through that process. So I think I want to state it positively, that there's an opportunity here for us to do a better job, a good job for our residents. And I hope that we seize that opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, and what I hear Sabby and others advocating for to staff is really to go back and look at that plan and see if there aren't some steps we can undertake that aren't all that costly. It seems as though we were scared off by the items that did have a huge price tag. But let's go back and look at what was on the list that could perhaps be undertaken without the huge price tag. Jan, did you have your hand up despite your desire for a potty break?
I did for a moment, but I was just going to really underscore what Sabby said. These areas will be put together and mostly determined by how utilities run, all of the utilities, be it cable or electric or whatever it is. So that's how they had worked on that.
Right. Okay. Just to wrap that up, I think there was a reference to Marrakesh, which was meant to be Tamaresque. Those esques get confused. Shall we take, let's be really wild and crazy and take 12 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to request when we get back, I just want to do a very quick follow-up, understanding that we've picked up what the council has suggested to us, and then we will pick up with the next slide after that summarization.
Great.
Andy, who's the host on this?
Clay.
That's me, Clay.
Oh, hi, Clay.
Hi.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Clay, when I try and start my video, it tells me I can't. Thank you. And Randy or Andy, is it Jeremy that we've been dealing with at Edison for President's Plaza? Do we know that?
There's an account representative named Nick that we have been working with on the weekly basis on the project.
Okay. Do we feel that we have resolved issues in a satisfactory way with them?
I wouldn't say past tense. I think we're actively working on the resolution.
Okay.
And I think we have much better picture of today than we did when we received the shocking news from SCE mid-March. And we'll be bringing something to you on May 13th.
So I had a Mobility 21 panel yesterday, and Jeremy wrote in the chat box, just let me know any way that we can help. Now, I think Jeremy might be at a certain level at Edison. I am not 100% positive, but it's worth looking into, and perhaps we could take him up on that offer.
I think we are still broadcasting live. We are on the right path, and I think that we'll have a more comprehensive update to council on the 13th.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, is everybody sappy? Are you back?
Sorry, I am. I'm just munching on my mid-morning snack, so excuse me.
No problem. Very good. Looks like we can proceed. We do have a couple of people with time constraints. So let's assume council members are in agreement, unless you raise your hand to express disagreement with something. No need to raise your hand and say, that goes for me too.
Okay, so what we heard from the council is that nothing in category 1 should be moved to another category, except with the exception of the council chambers being more focused on ADA and things that are necessary, including any pandemic related changes that we may need to make in that remodel. So that's one thing. We also heard that Discover Palm Desert is a priority that is identified maybe as shifting to 1, and Invest Palm Desert as well. And then also the undergrounding facilitation of the neighborhoods, looking back at that again to see where that process stopped and where we need to repick that up and what we can possibly do. So that's really from my notes, what I hear from the council. The other categories didn't seem to be misplaced based on what is presented here. I think there was a discussion about the security plan, but we can pick that up as well and just take a look at that to see what, I think that means a lot of different things maybe to a lot of different people, and maybe we need to look at that just a little bit more in depth. So with that, yes.
Precisely. And let me just suggest that naming sends a message. So if you're going to put something security related in a lower category, look carefully at that title and make sure it's appropriately descriptive. If it's really about facility modifications, let's put that in the title so it doesn't project that we give security a low priority.
Understood. And then as we look at these, we will look obviously at the same priorities that they are listed with the exceptions that I just mentioned, including in number 2, we would be looking at the development services remodel for the one-stop shop considerations and things that we've already talked about, but they are priority 2. So nothing else changes. If I have that appropriately, unless there's comments with respect to something different, then I will switch to the next slide. But Mayor, if you see anyone with their hand raised, please let us know before we move on.
We all look happy.
Okay. I will move to the next slide, Andy.
Thank you, Janet.
Wait, you know what? I have a question. And I apologize if you've gone over it. When you talk about median landscape, are we just talking maintenance? Are we talking switching out for low, so we have lower maintenance? What exactly does that mean?
Of course. So the intent here was to look at some strategic replacement of material within our medians, really looking at how we could incorporate more rock cobble, more granite, lower maintenance items, trying to refresh some of the pallets and material in those medians. So I do think that this was a strategic program that may in time reduce some of those annual costs for some of our medians.
Thank you. And I do think that's important. Thank you so much.
Go for that next slide as fast as you can.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to keep the positivity going here, but I do have some very direct messaging to share with you on the Portola interchange. And over the last few weeks, I've had an opportunity to explore this in great depth in collaboration with CVAG, certainly Tom Kirk and Jonathan Hoy. I've gone over some of their presentations that they've been giving on not only the Portola interchange, but their funding picture as well. Had an opportunity to look at that, and then about 20 years of history on our side of this project. So the Portola interchange, the idea was conceptualized in the early 2000s. This project has been around for some time. And in my opinion, this is a project that has never really been fully funded. We had a 2008 agreement with CVAG. This was an agreement that addressed the design, the right-of-way acquisition, the utilities, as well as the project funding for construction. But this was at a time when the design was years away from being completed. And while that agreement was structured such that CVAG had a 75% share in that funding up to $54.075 million, that was based on certain revenue assumptions from Measure A and TUMF, the Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee, that never really materialized. And I'll share with you the last 5 years of transportation revenue data from CVAG here in a moment to share with you what their funding picture actually looked like. Actually, in 2014, when that agreement was amended to include Riverside County as the project lead, there was language in there that started to address the funding reality, and that CVAG may need to pull out of that agreement or to fund this at a different level if this resulted in a regional imbalance in transportation funding. That agreement, it seems, was done at an age when CVAG did enter into agreements for all 3 phases. That's not something that they do anymore. It has been a number of years since that 2008 agreement, since that 2014 agreement. Costs for this project have gone up. Back in 2008, this was a $72 million project. It is presently over $114 million. And we've shown you not only the project costs, but also the revenue on this slide. Back in 2008, we had roughly $15 million in city money. So this was through our redevelopment agency that were intended to be applied to this project. The funding picture today, you've got a little about right around $40 million targeted for this project. That is encompassing of the monies that the city has put in, $15 million from SARTA, $5 million in Measure A, and there are some monies from CVAG that are projected for this project. I see a hand raised already.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. But I want to say we're talking about right away. And as you mentioned, those are utilities. We are looking at 114.5 million. We still have not come to an agreement with Union Pacific. So we can count on that number being higher, and they are not that easy to deal with.
So the right-of-way acquisition in here does contemplate the acquisition costs and even the Union Pacific piece. You're right about that. The Union Pacific piece is about $1 million value property. That's for what I believe is an additional 26 feet of right-of-way. And they're asking, I think, 9.5 million for that. So there is a substantial gap. There is a significant difference between what they're asking and the market value for that property. But I do think that is accounted for in the 28.8 million for the right-of-way acquisition.
Although it's not been completed, so that remains to be seen.
That is correct. That is still an outstanding step. So based on what we know today, this is a $114 million project, and you can see that the costs have gone up significantly, while there still is a very large revenue gap. If we can,
could you quickly cover the acronyms?
Yes. So PS&E, that's a plan specification and engineering. I see a nodding head from close. Okay, Randy, go ahead and correct me.
Plan specifications and estimates.
Estimates. So close. Okay, thank you for that correction, Randy. Which other? So we've got TUMF, that's Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee. We've got Measure A, and I know in a slide here I'm going to say RACE. It's the Regional Arterial Cost Estimates. That's another acronym that's on the slide, and we have right-of-way as well. Is there another sneaky acronym on here that I've missed? Okay, well, let's go ahead and change slides. So this is a picture of the CVAG transportation revenue. So the agreement that we had executed in 2014 with CVAG and Riverside County, when Riverside County became the lead agency on this project, had a construction date of 2020. We were supposed to be under construction by that date, and that agreement was expiring. So last year, we did amend that agreement for the PS&E, the design phase, as well as for the right-of-way and utility phases. We did not extend the construction phase. So the construction phase would require a separate agreement between all of the parties. But that agreement was extended for those first 2 phases so that we could get a project that is shelf ready in anticipation that perhaps there could be funding out there. But the reality is that there's not a level of funding out there that perhaps was projected, that perhaps was anticipated back in 2008. CVAG has shared with us that their 2016 regional arterial cost estimates have identified several $billion of projects out in the universe within this area. Now, this is not to say all of that is CVAG's responsibility, but there are many demands. There are many projects out there. And as they looked through their TPPS, this project was ranked number 51. It's not the highest ranked project, and it's not the highest ranked interchange project. And in fact, as CVAG starts to look at their own cash flow for the next 10 years, they're at $370 million in negative cash flow. They are looking at alternatives. They are looking at how, say, changes to the funding ratio. Right now, they're at a 75-25 split, whether that were to move to a 50-50 split. They are looking at ways of incorporating additional revenue streams, how that might change the funding picture. But I think as we look at this interchange is ranked number 51 in the TPPS, the Transportation Project Prioritization System. It's not the highest ranked project. And even as they start to make some adjustments to look at how they could fund more projects and partner with more agencies, this may not be the highest rated project. I've shared with you on this slide their Measure A and TUMF revenues for the last 5 years. This is a different picture than I think what was thought of back in 2008. And right now it's very clear that CVAG is not able to participate, even if that agreement were still active, at a 75% funding share, contributing a significant portion of funding for this project. So we have, if we can go back to that previous slide, Janet, a very significant funding gap, barring some other event from occurring. Now, we do have an update that I want to share with you, and Randy can speak to more specifically on federal earmark. We have pursued opportunities with Congressman Ruiz to seek some additional monies for this and to perhaps change this imbalance and to make this a more realizable project. But even that has limitations, and even that has left us with a funding gap. Randy, do you want to talk about the earmark that we have submitted?
Sure thing, Andy. So the earmark request we initially put in for the full gap of funding, which was approximately 74 million. We submitted that to the Congressman's office. The Congressman's office subsequently got back to us and said that Congresspeople are limited to $20 million per request. So our 74 ask has been reduced to 20 million. What does the 20 million go for? We discussed with Riverside County, and the best way to ask for that 20 million would be for the right-of-way and utility costs. That's not the full cost, as you can see. That's 28.8 is listed here on the slide. So that would shave off most of that cost for the cost of right-of-way and utilities.
So I think the summary coming out of that is that we remain at a point, even if we were to receive a federal earmark, where this project has a significant funding imbalance, and it is not a fully funded project.
Question, comment?
Yes, Sabby, please.
And Andy, I took that not as a pregnant pause, but as a conclusion of your report and an opportunity to comment. Is that correct? Or
it is, yes. I think staff's presentation here really is to bring some reality to the funding challenges that we have with the Portola interchange. We do not have a solution for the council today, but we just needed to be very direct with you about some of the challenges that this project faces right now.
Yeah, and I appreciate that directness. I'll start by saying that I think staff has done a great job, and I'm very appreciative of that, and I understand the challenge you're facing. Let me share with you my perspective as an outsider and far less than an expert on these matters. After being a part of the process to bring this to fruition, we were sitting there full of energy and enthusiasm, designing the artwork in an emergency meeting because construction was about to begin. The next thing we know, not really. And there's a lot of backtracking. And I have concerns about CVAG. I'm not going to say this feels and smells and tastes like another bait and switch, but something just doesn't feel right. This is not the first interchange CVAG has been involved in. So we're not inventing the wheel. We're just doing something again that has been done before. And a certain CEO is infamous for saying, if I waited for a project to be fully funded before I started putting a shovel in the ground, we wouldn't have one project up and running in the Coachella Valley. Where did that CEO go? One of your slides, I think the one before this one, indicated that CVAG committed to fund 75% of the project cost. And then I see in Tom's memo, get this, I've never heard this. The proposed I-10 Portola interchange is a city project, but CVAG staff is more than willing to help. I mean, if that's not backtracking, since when is a regional interstate interchange a city project? And if that's what it is, why has CVAG been actively involved in interchanges in the past? You know, and I'm sorry, you can hear the frustration in my voice, but oh boy. I think that, and this stuff about, well, it's no longer a priority and we got this going on. Come on, I'm not as accepting of those kinds of comments and perspectives as you are. It is a priority. Not only do we have Cal State going up, but now we've got this arena potentially going up. We need more interchanges now, and we'll certainly need them in the future. You said you don't have a solution, and I understand that. It's not for lack of trying. It's not for lack of talent and expertise. I understand that this is a daunting project. I just wanted to share my perspective that it doesn't feel right. I sometimes get the sense with CVAG that the louder you yell and the squeakier the wheel you are, the more things go your way, whether that's a bridge for CVLink, hello La Quinta, whether that's interchanges in the East Valley, hello Indio, hello Coachella. Maybe the solution isn't in the paperwork. Maybe it's yelling and screaming much louder than we have in the past. I don't know, but I would encourage staff and us as a city to continue to pursue this interchange with much greater energy and vigor than we ever have before. I think it's important.
Well, and I will just kind of jump in. The staff we have had numerous conversations with Tom and Jonathan at CVAG, and this project was turned over to Riverside County years ago. CVAG's position, you know, and is basically that the funding for these interstate projects, capacity projects, that's not where the priority is right now, is building capacity. The priority with the federal funding and it is more on congestion mitigation variables than it is on capacity improvements. This interchange is never going to score well under that scenario because there is no congestion to mitigate. The interchange doesn't exist. So it's never going to get out of the gate scoring very high. And right now it's ranked 6 out of 8 interchange requests. I mean, the most they've ever spent on an interchange, my understanding, is the Jefferson Street interchange at like $23 million. We are 40 to 50 million at least. Well, more than that short.
I think that was a $100 million project.
And CVAG's contribution, I believe, was 23 million. We're currently 75 million short and ranked 6 out of 8. So the way that the federal funding is categorized and prioritized, Portola is not going to be a player unless they add capacity as one of the variables that you can do. In the rationale would be is that you would much rather defend adding capacity at Cook or Monterey than building another one. And so that's what we're faced with right now. You know, Tom, I've sat in a couple meetings with him recently. He is reinforcing to all the members that they were not built to build interchanges. They were built to, you know, handle regional, you know, capacity improvements. And they've gotten into the interchange business, but that it's essentially it's not reasonable for us to assume that CVAG is going to close the gap. The earmark was an interesting discussion, but even if we got the full $20 million earmark, which is likely not going to happen, but if we did, we'd still be 55 or 60 million short. So I think that the whole point here today was let's make sure that all 5 of our council members are operating on the same set of facts. CVAG's position is what CVAG's position is at this point, and this project's only going to continue to get more expensive. So we really need we really need the council to think about this and have a kind of a jumping off point. Coming in new, it's been interesting to me how different opinions are being held on the council about this project. I understand why, listening to all the history that's gone on and the design of the interchange, but I just felt like there's a real need to get the facts out there. And I asked Tom to please be as straightforward as possible, which is what he did in that memo, to where you all see that what he's telling us. So I think this is something where we need to let it settle in. If it's still a huge priority to council down the road, there's always a way to solve the issue. It's just going to be most likely painful on our pocketbook if we decide to try to do that. But that was the whole point of today, was to make sure all 5 of you are seeing exactly the same thing that we're seeing.
May I weigh in briefly? I think we all share the frustration that CIP expressed because that impression was created so recently that construction was imminent and that we needed to rush to deal with the aesthetics. We hear you. Does it make sense, given what you're saying, to at least go on record with CVAG attempting to preserve that original commitment, or at least communicate the city's perception that original commitment should be retained as further possibilities are explored and more facts evolve? Is that a yes?
We can certainly. I'll give you 2 answers, and they'll meet somewhere in the middle. I think it makes sense we could take that position with them. I'm concerned that it was so full of caveats that I'm not sure it did much other than, kind of make the project feel good at the time. There was no hard funding behind it is the problem. It was caveated that, well, if this happens and if that happens. Even today, I'm not sure they could come even close to that original commitment to us, given how their revenue streams are flowing in. But that's my only concern, is we could certainly have the discussion, but I think I think CVAG left so many outs that I'm not sure they're going to view it as a commitment.
And I understand that. I just hate to see us drop it all together. Gina.
I just wanted to say that I can't remember exactly when, but maybe Mr. Kirk has a record of it. I thought he told us this grim news a couple of years ago, because I've been operating under that impression that we were millions off from ever having the Portola interchange. And that's what I told people.
So we did start this discussion last year through the CIP and through the budget discussion. We didn't have a full picture of CVAG's cash flow analysis. That was something that CVAG had committed last year, that as we were amending that 2014 agreement to really focus on completing the design, focusing on the utilities and right-of-way acquisition, that we would hold the construction side of it, that we would come back later, and that they were going to initiate and undertake that cash flow analysis. That is what they did over the summer and in fall. And what has led to them to say we have an imbalance over the next 10 years, and that they have to reevaluate how they participate in and fund regional projects. So you're right, we did start that discussion last year with council, and I know there have been other discussions with CVAG since then.
Right. I know that my last discussion with Mr. Kirk was that the city needed to figure out how to get the additional millions in funding.
Thank you. Jan?
So the discussion about the funding not being available has been going on for a significant length of time. And remember, it was way at the top as of the TPPS when we were talking about building all those homes out in that area near the I-10. Then, of course, we got hit with the recession and home building stopped and Portola dropped down. It's been the conversation that we don't have the funds. It is not a priority, has been going on for years. Quite frankly, that is why I was so surprised. And this is, the county is the lead agency on this project. That is why I was so surprised when it was, we have to hurry up if we're going to have any kind of design, any art integrated into this project. And to me, it seemed like that came from out of nowhere. I couldn't understand it, and I still don't understand how that happened. But we've got a long way off, so we've got to figure this out. And the conversations at CVLink Transportation, the conversations at Riverside County Transportation Commission mirror the funding discussion that we are having today. The funds just aren't there for many of the projects.
Sappy?
Thank you. And this is helpful. I get it. I understand the challenges. I will say my takeaway is we asked for a bridge for CVLink. We didn't get one. Another city did. We're asking for an interchange. Looks like we're not going to get one anytime soon. If another city does, you think I sound frustrated and potentially angry today? Wait till that happens. I mean, if CBAG can't do it for us, I hope we're not just losing our place in line. I have a slightly different memory and perspective than Jan does in terms of the project, because I'd been following it for years, and my understanding through staff, not through CVAG, was that it was progressing. It's just, you know, these are 20-year projects and we're just moving it along. And when we finally got approval from the county and so forth, that was the final step in that process. So maybe I had a misunderstanding at the time, or maybe I was presented with different facts or understandings. But at the end of the day, you know, we asked for something with CVLink, didn't get it, another city does. We've asked for a bridge, not getting it. If CVAG gets involved in an interchange, for another city, then I'll be wanting to understand why they couldn't make it happen here, but they're doing it in another city.
Thank you. Jan, I'm eager to move us along before some people turn it into pumpkins.
Okay, this will be very quick. It's really important to understand that interchanges and pumpkins. Interchanges do have to qualify for funding. And as Todd said, capacity is not a priority. It is about air quality. It is about safety. Those are the things that rate something high enough. The Portola interchange doesn't fit into that picture. Not to say we don't want it. I get it, we do, but the qualifiers for projects for funding are different than what we're looking at.
And I'll quickly say, I think the reason we want it so badly is to build the infrastructure before the congestion and the negative consequences emerge, instead of having to be reactive. Right. So thank you very much to staff for trying to get us all on the same page. Some of us will have to catch up emotionally, and I join you in that, Sabby. But at least we've all received the same input. What's next?
This was it, Mayor. Our main question to you today was, I just kind of going back for the day, just any other feedback you might have, and is there anything we've missed in the CIP projects?
Thank you. I thought that was next. And because Sappy and Gina both have time constraints, let me invite you first, Sappy, and then Gina to answer that question.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me, and I have until 11, so I'm okay. But I'll process that. But I do want to just say, express my gratitude to staff again. I mean, I think staff and we as a city continue to shine, and the process we're going through right now is another example of that. You know, I think to monitor the progress of existing projects so that they don't get lost, and then to look ahead and to prioritize. That can only be a good thing. So thank you, staff, for leading us through that.
Gina?
Okay, yeah, so I mirror Sabby's sentiments. And then just to recap what my fellow council member said in terms of items 1 through 4, I'm in agreement with the suggestions. And so I think this was a very productive meeting. And Todd, thank you. And Andy, for your leadership roles in putting this all together. And Janet, for your financial fortitude and making sure everything balances out. So really, this was a great and productive meeting. Thank you.
Karina?
Thank you. Again, chiming in and keeping it short. Thank you, staff, for such a very concise and very clear to understand the limitations, the shortfalls, and all of the different constraints, where I can see the frustration that we can't materialize the gap funding no matter how much we would like. I don't think it's fair to judge what other cities are doing. We don't know their progress. We don't know their goals. And I think it's not going to bring us any favors to balk at the process when we don't know how our sister cities are benefiting. But in terms of what requests that I would like to see, we've addressed the topic at hand. My request is additional. I think that we, in echoing the mayor's sentiments last night about green initiatives, I would love to see what we can do with waste reduction. We have the schools that we can partner with to be able to have excess food that isn't served to be redistributed to the community instead of landfill waste. So there's a lot of small tweaks that we could do in partnerships without having to make substantial financial contributions that can help move things forward. All of these things that will bring and highlight our innovation, our desire to catch up to our sister cities and be able to make progress to catch the attention of Cal State for our future Cal State Palm Desert. Thank you.
And Karina, are you aware of a sister city that has a program in place you want to commend to us?
I have been in talks with people on the sustainability committee in Palm Springs, and so exploring some of the things that Palm Springs Unified, or conversations that have started in Palm Springs Unified, and seeing how we can go about. So I would love to have that conversation once there's more information on the ground.
Thank you. Jan?
Thank you. I want to, of course, thank the staff for all you've done, and I particularly appreciate the fact that when it was voiced that the council didn't feel like they were truly part of the beginning to end goal setting, it was absolutely heard and appreciated. So thank you so much for that. I know we have great things to do, and I think we are on to the in the right direction, and I look forward to more of this as we go, where I know we're working in the right direction. We'll get stuff done. And thank you so much for all your help and always staff answering my questions. So thank you.
I certainly concur that this has been a terrific restructuring of the conversation. And it was truly brilliant to see the slide that consolidated as priorities the supplemental requests that have come up. I do have an additional request. Back at the brief session we had just before Todd's arrival, when I voiced I'd like to see Palm Desert return to a position of environmental leadership, the whole council concurred. Last night, Mr. Floyd expressed chagrin that I seem to be devoid of ideas. I have to call him up and correct the impression I gave. I'm not devoid of ideas, but what I tried to express at that session is that the ideas I have previously expressed and secured inclusion in our goals ultimately did not happen because staff discovered them to be impractical. Things like subsidizing residential retrofits that could give rise to prevailing wage, ruining the subsidy. So what I was really asking for was some staff vetting to help identify practical ways of moving forward. So I was really pleased to see here the proposal relevant to solar production, because I believe it does exactly that. There's another front where I'd like to ask for staff analysis to see how we can move forward. And that's alternative fuels for our city vehicles. There was a time when the city of Palm Desert was the first to use CNG fueling for its city vehicles. If I'm not mistaken, we abandoned that on the grounds that maintenance challenges were proving to be a problem. Yesterday morning, again, I heard other cities brag about their CNG fleets. So I'm not saying CNG is the answer, but I'm saying it's well past the time where we as a city should be gas guzzling. And so I look to staff, and I'm not asking for this to be a big ticket item. My hope would be ultimately we spend the same amount of money, but we spend it more smartly. So I'm looking for some analysis from staff as to how to move to alternative fuels with less of a carbon footprint. And that inspires Sabby to share.
Just to add on to that, I love the concept of regaining our stature and being at the forefront of environmental sensitivity. The most impactful and least costly way, of course, for us to do that is to opt into desert community energy. We have demonstrable data from Palm Springs now in 1 year alone, reducing the carbon footprint by 93 metric tons, which is equivalent to taking 20,000 cars off the street. Nothing else that we're considering would come close to that and would cost substantially more than zero. So as staff explores ways that we can regain our stature as environmentally sensitive city, that opting into desert community energy has to be a part of that discussion. And I didn't, in other requests, I think staff is looking for some input and feedback. I just want to mention a big picture. To me, the vision of creating a downtown city core remains prominent. And the next natural step towards that, once we've completed the initial CVLink, both San Pablo phases, is El Paseo. We kind of started with that, segued into San Pablo, and I think we need to return to El Paseo to continue implementing the vision of a downtown city core. That is important for all sorts of reasons that I won't hash through again. And then we already have momentum now with additional bike paths and pedestrian paths. And I think that's top of mind for me and top of priority for me. And I'll be happy to see our efforts continue in that direction. Thank you.
And before I call on, I open the floodgates here. Before I call on those who have their hands raised, I do want to quickly feature for staff that the majority of this council found problems with opting for DCE. So that needs to be recognized. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be further studied at an appropriate time, because the majority of this council also supported staying in the JPA so that we could preserve our flexibility. But the majority of the council has not identified opting for DCE as a priority at this time. Similarly, while the council endorsed implementing the first steps in the Gibbs study, we've had no determination about other more expensive recommendations in the Gibbs study. So the May conversation will be the next opportunity to get some feedback on that. We have Karina and Jan looking to speak.
I would just like to express, in terms of all of that we're discussing and revamping our commitment to the environment, perhaps one thing we could do is reinstate the Sustainability Committee. I think that that's something we can get residents engaged. Mr. Floyd is very, very active. The Sierra Club, I'm sure, would love to reinvigorate the efforts and have community members bring the ideas that we can start enacting. And perhaps if there's enough support from the community, we can look at DCE again. I think that there are so many changes that we have to look at. We spent so much time looking at a project that in 2008 looked for sure, and things change. I think it's worthwhile to take a look at what we can learn from Palm Springs and move forward with more information. I think it's worthwhile to take a look.
Thank you. The Sustainability Committee is alive and well. Jan.
Thank you. It is alive and well. In our last meeting just a couple days ago, the members are quite engaged in looking at some projects that they can get in the front of and really make happen in our city. So it's a good group of community members who come together on that. I did want to mention, I know we talked about what we're doing in Civic Center Park with solar. I want to make sure that we are at least keeping our minds open to do a complete and very comprehensive energy inventory throughout the city. When we look at LED lights and those sorts of things, whether it's in our landscaping or in our traffic plan, a complete energy inventory would be helpful and certainly would pay for itself easily. Thank you.
All right, anything else? Todd and Janet and the rest of the staff are going to need to move quickly between now and May 11th. So if, I don't want to say if this is our last opportunity, but it's certainly our best opportunity. But seeing no other hands, again, I do want to compliment you, Todd, and the whole staff for this revamped approach, which obviously worked and worked very, very efficiently. You have any final remarks?
Oh, thank you for that. I'd just like to thank Andy and Janet and the team for putting all this together. They did a nice job and put up with me in several different iterations of this. So I'm glad it worked well. So I appreciate their patience with me as well. We will go ahead and put everything, we'll summarize everything after the meeting. I'll send you a copy of that. And we'll start off the May 11th meeting with some feedback from today's meeting and some ideas that we're putting together already based upon the feedback you had. So thank you for your time. I know time is valuable and we appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Get your vaccinations, folks. It takes all of us to keep working together. Thank you.